Hi everyone, welcome to CommerceShop podcast. This is Sathish, your host. Here we talk about technology trends and AI for e-commerce owners and manufacturers. And we are today joined with our guest Fenyo. Sorry, he has an experience of close to 30 years working with retail industry. He is the co-founder of Astra Works AI, and he's also host and podcast Retail Playbook, and he's a managing partner at Pine Street Advisors, and previously has worked with McKinsey, Kroger, and various big organization. Ken, welcome to the show.
Yeah, welcome. Thanks very much. Appreciate you having me.
Thank you, Ken. Ken, you've been in the industry for quite a while. Uh, just want to understand how the things are changing now. What do you see is the biggest opportunity for a retailer?
Yeah, I think there's been a lot of changes in the retail environment. Definitely AI
Mhm.
is a huge one. I mean, I think everyone's really trying to figure it out. I think that's really sparking a lot of changes. I mean, there's broader changes in the business that are going to consumers. I think there's a lot of challenges around. On the one hand, you have affluent consumers spending more, and you have a lot of consumers strapped, and that's creating challenges really everywhere across the
Mhm.
business. But I think from a tech point, definitely AI is the one we're seeing is has the most opportunity, but I think it's also where most retailers are struggling to really figure out what to do.
Interesting. And I know you worked with Kroger specifically on the loyalty and customer retention. So do you think AI is making things easier, or is it making it very difficult, in your opinion?
For
What do
for
you think?
loyalty specifically.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think actually loyalty is a really interesting area for AI because I think it's a real double-edged sword. On
Mhm.
the one hand, I think it can really help do things like personalization. So one of the big things Kroger did was to take its customer data and then deliver very personalized coupons to people. So if you bought Tide, you would get a Tide offer. And we found over time that really drove behavior, but it was a kind of limited thing to do. We really had a bunch of coupons and in a lot of cases use spreadsheets to figure out where do we send that offer, which household should get it. And I think with AI, I think what really you're able to do is not just take personalize that offer, but you can personalize the channel, the content around it, the images, the words you use, and I think you can do that all in a very dynamic fashion to make things feel much more relevant to the shopper along a bunch of dimensions. I think the challenge comes though. One of the reasons loyalty works is there's this gap between um, perceived value and actual value of a loyalty point. So if
Mhm.
you think about like fuel rewards, which is a big thing that Kroger's done, the value, people earn, you spend $100, you get 10 cents off your fuel. So if you have 15-gallon tank, that's around $1.50 savings or about 1.5%. People though feel that reward is a lot more because they hate paying for gas, and so any discount is really valued. If the AI
Yeah.
engines take all that and make it really clear, hey, by the way, that point you're getting is really worth only like a penny, that'll be really change the way that you have to market and think about your loyalty programs if you want to be successful going forward.
Okay. The reason why I started with customer loyalty is I know many retailers are trying to use AI across many areas in the organization. Um, they are trying it out. They are not very successful in many ways, but they are trying it out. What do you think is the biggest opportunity for AI? Hey, this is something is worked, and people can try this. That is definitely working out, in your opinion.
Yeah. Um, I think right now what I'm seeing is that the place I think people are getting a lot of value is just that ability to interrogate your data better. So if I think about, I go back to the example around customer data, really trying just to understand what are the underlying drivers of behavior. Imagine switching gears slightly, but imagine you're sitting around the table analyzing that week's sales and you say, hey, why did sales go up in this market or down in that market? Historically, you've had to go back and pull data and do all this work. I think now with AI, you're seeing teams are able to much more flexibly find those answers out in real time, which I think help then create better plans. At the store level, what you see is, I'm one of the best use cases I've seen is, store managers get, I don't know, 40, 100 emails every day with various bits of data, various things they're supposed to be doing. And, it can be hard to really synthesize. And the last thing you want is your store manager spending, 3 hours every day just trying to read their email and figure out what is it I have to be doing. If,
Hmm.
I've seen is the AI takes that, synthesizes it down to the, 3 to 5 things you really need to focus on today. I think that both saves time and then makes the stores run more efficiently, which I do think is the area where you still see most retail sales happening, and I think is a key point for the consumer.
Interesting. And what do you think the big misconception by retailers with AI? Like,
That retailers have.
yeah.
Yeah, I think, well, there's a bunch, but I'll take one, which is, I think the biggest one is really goes back to that data one, which is that AI will fix your data problems. So the idea is, well, I've got all this messy data. My data is still siloed, even though, we've been trying to fix it for 20 years. I've got, all sorts of data everywhere. I'll just put an AI engine on it and everything will work magically. And I think the truth of the matter is, it doesn't, not only doesn't work magically, it actually makes the problem worse, because we all know that the AI can hallucinate if the underlying data isn't really well connected. And so, what I don't think I've seen is retailers really understanding the full extent that they need to get their hands around their data finally. It means integrating it, it means adding context or semantic layers on top of it, so that data is really understandable by the AI in a way that you can get much better answers. So I think most people just seem to think that the AI will fix it on its own, and it's really just not true.
So without even doing data modernization, they just get into the AI. Hey, let's implement AI, and we.
Exactly. Let's just dump it on top. Now, in fairness, I've talked to a lot of organizations that are doing the hard work now of enhancing their data, better integrating it. But I just think when you talk to people, I don't think they realize the extent of the work that they're going to have to do to really get the most out of the AI.
Trust. And I know with Astra Works, you help a lot of retailers and powering their organization. What does you actually do? Like how you help them?
Yeah, I think our main focus is in two areas, with a light one and a third. The two main one is setting a real strategy for the organization. So, where do you really want to go with the AI? Where do you think it's going to have the most impact? What use cases are going to make the most sense for you, given where you're at as an organization and where you're challenged? And then the biggest one really then becomes the change management aspect, and that's how do I really get this implemented in a way that's going to have impact? Because retailers are huge organizations. You go to a Kroger, Walmart, right? There are hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of employees, and trying to get them to adopt a new technology and to use it in a way that's going to add value to the business is a really hard challenge. And I think it's one that most of the time retailers and really all businesses underestimate just how hard that challenge is. You just can't throw a new technology out there and expect everyone just to embrace it and use it the way they hope they're going to use it. You really need to spend the time to understand what's the training they need, what are the guardrails I have to put in place, how do I even rethink my processes to make it work. The last one we do, which is a light touch, is more how do you think about the technology? We're not a technology organization, and so typically we're sort of advising on what's the best approach. We do talk to a lot of vendors and retail tech companies, so we try to hopefully understand if you're needing, let's say, a shopping assistant, who are a couple of people you should go talk to, and then vet to make sure you get the best solution for your needs.
Hmm. Is there any specific size that you think this could be, or your AI strategies things would be helpful, or it can work for anyone?
Oh, it definitely can work for anyone. Our focus is more on what I call the mid market. So whether that's a large regional grocer or even a smaller one. And I think the reason really is I don't think the needs change. But if you go up to a Kroger and you go to a Walmart, they've got huge teams already in place working on AI
Yeah.
strategy. They've got relationships with the McKinseys and the BCGs of the world, right? So they've kind of got their pieces in place. What I find the ones who are really struggling the most to come up with the right way they want to handle AI is sort of those large enough that they know they need to leverage it, but also large enough that it's hard to do. and they're the ones I think we really tend to try to work with, and we're finding, is a good fit for what we bring to the table.
Is there any revenue size like they should be 20 million and up or 100
I
employees plus?
Yeah, I don't think we have a real specific revenue size. I think we're typically working with chains that are 100 stores up to, even a couple thousand stores in their
Mhm.
network. I think
Okay.
that, so we're not really worried about, the exact
Right.
size, but like I said, I think you want to be bigger. I think when you get into the hundreds of millions, even, low billions of dollars, I think that's where you start saying like, wow, AI could have a huge impact on our business, but we're sort of big and unwieldy enough that it's not going to be easy to change how we do things. You're a smaller organization with the right leadership, you can make a lot of quick decisions, and it's a much more manageable problem. It's that, if you imagine you've got, I don't know, 100, 300, 500 or more stores, that's a lot of things to coordinate to get a program to work right, whether that's AI or frankly any other sort of technology implementation.
I understand. And when you approach an CEO for a transformation, how do they think about it? Because everybody did digital transformation 10, 15 years back, and now suddenly AI transformation. Is this something they should think in the same mindset, approach it, or it should be a way different mindset they should think about it?
Yeah, it's a great question. My sense is that there's a lot of similarities, I think, between digital transformation and then, we usually talk about where I was at Kroger, and then Grant Sedman, who's my partner at Astra Works, was at dunnhumby. But even before you got to the heavy digital transformation, there was a transformation around using customer data better. And I think I think the big difference with AI is it's happening a lot faster. I mean, the technology is evolving faster, the use cases are evolving faster. I think the companies that have embraced AI are seeing some traction with it. That means you can't just sit around waiting for for it to get more comfortable to do. But at the same time, I think some of the basics around change management I found in all those customer data, digital, and now AI, that change management aspect really is the hardest part to get right, and it's really at the core of what you need to do if you want to be successful. And so I think when we talk to the CEOs, a lot of times they're really more just trying to figure out, how do I go approach this? It's so big, and theoretically it could touch all parts of my organization. It's almost
Yeah.
like where it's almost too big to bite off at once. So where do I start? There's a lot of times where we come in and have that first conversation.
So where do most people start, in your opinion? Is it on the
Yeah,
same?
well, I think if you go to most organizations now, they're doing what we call random acts of AI, meaning, a group over here is doing something, maybe they're doing it, maybe they license technology, or frankly, they're just using their personal chat GPT or Claude account. Um, I think most people, what we find is, I think a lot of people want to start with more low hanging fruit. And I do think there's something about, can we just roll out, whether it's Copilot or Gemini, it's usually, something that, I think you see a lot of people leveraging either Microsoft or Google because they're already using them for part of their email and other corporate technologies. Can we just roll it out and train people to use it productively so they can get, better insight into sales data or customer data and all that? That's where we see a lot of people starting. It's an easy way just to get everybody's feet wet. I'm not sure it's really where ultimately the real value will be, but I do
Yeah.
think it's an easy way to get going. And I think for most organizations, getting going with something is better than, spending the next year just planning what we're going to do.
Mhm. So do you think this co-pilot and other things, these are something very basic? I was under the assumption that is kind of a norm for the industry by now. Is it not the case with retail, in your opinion?
No, I think it's I don't think it's like advanced. I think, like I said, I think there's a lot of value just in the ability to get quicker insights into the data, right? Because I think one thing you find with retail is they have a lot of data.
Yeah.
And even if it's not well organized, it can be a pain, if you just even think of something as like the weekly, when I was at Kroger, we had a weekly sales meeting. So all the merchandising heads and all the categories and marketing and would come together and we go through the sales data. Getting that report together was not a small exercise, right? Multiple people had to pull data from different systems and put it into one place and then make sure, quality check it. And then, like I said, if question came up, why did sales grow in this market? Somebody had to go back and do even more of that to kind of work. So I do think there's value in just simple AI solutions, right? Those are things I think AI can be very good at. Um,
Hmm.
like I said, I do think you see it coming into other areas that might have more direct impact on the business. You think about spatial intelligence in the store as an example, demand forecasting for perishables.
Hmm.
I think we're going to see those really take hold. But like I said, a lot of organizations are just more comfortable with that easy first step to get their feet wet, and then find those higher value use cases.
Hmm. I understand. But just help us understand, like there are some organization adopting AI, like big organization who are doing it. But if it is a mid-sized companies, what kind of companies are adopting AI well, and compared to those who are not are struggling? So what difference you see between these two organizations?
Yeah, if I come back to it, I do think the big difference is less about size, and more about leadership's desire to really push the envelope, and then a focus on how do we really do that right from a change management and a strategy point of view. I'll give you one example. We did a study recently about agentic commerce, and so we looked at 25 of the top grocers and try to see what are you doing on your own site and what are you doing on third-party sites like ChatGPT or Claude, in
Hmm.
terms of your commerce play.
Hmm.
And what we found is that most retailers really had barely started doing something. Obviously, the Krogers and the WalMarts were pretty active. Amazon, obviously. But one thing that was interesting is you looked at a retailer like Wegmans, which is around 100-ish stores. Um, they were really had the same score as Albertsons and Kroger, which are clearly, 100. I think Kroger's a 100 billion plus company. Albertsons, 10x the size of Wegmans. And so when you look at that, you realize it's not necessarily the size of the company, but it's their willingness to say, let's try to use AI to make the experience better for customers. Let's use AI to make the experience better for our employees so they can serve our customers better. And so I do think there's something about a bit of a, as leadership got that mindset as they want to push the envelope and they want to figure out how to take advantage of this technology. And it's a lot less about just raw size. At least that's what we're finding for now.
Okay. Okay. Let's step back on in terms of the consumers. What do you see that, like, with the AI discovery in general, the discovery process itself of consumers has changed? How do you think uh, that is going to impact customer retailers, or how is that organic, or is it good or bad? What's your opinion on that?
Yeah, I mean, I do think it's a real threat for retailers. I think we're seeing already is that customers are pretty rapidly, not it's not 100% of customers, but it's a pretty strong, let's say quarter to third, are actively using AI as part of their discovery process. Whether that's for apparel or groceries or electronics, which means they're going to, let's say, ChatGPT, and they're entering their search. Hey, I'm looking for a new swimsuit. I'm going on vacation. What do you recommend? And so I do think for retailers that's a real threat if you start losing that relationship with the customer. And it's a threat in really a couple ways. One, clearly, if people start buying directly from the LLMs, that could be a
Yeah.
real disintermediation risk. But even before you get there, imagine all the insight I'm getting into that customer. They're going on a vacation, they're looking for a swimsuit, they want a certain style. If I then just go to a website and buy a swimsuit, all the retailer knows at the end is, well, they bought that swimsuit. They don't know all that background that went into the search. I think they sometimes call that dark search. So what I really think retailers need to do is really two things. I think one is they do have to invest in their product data, invest in sort of how they're getting out and getting the word about their product out on things like Reddit and social media and Wikipedia and all the places that feed the LLMs, so they are visible. But I do think they need to do more on their own sites, right? I think consumers are going to quickly start expecting when I go to a site and I enter, I find a search bar, I should be able to have a real conversation, not just going back to the old day of like swimsuits and then having to sort through it all myself. I want to go to my site and say, hey, I'm going on a vacation. I'm looking for a swimsuit that has these features. What do you recommend? And I think the retailers want to have that experience on their site so they can capture that insight, they can capture that business, but also just so they can enhance their own customer experience.
Do you think any retailers has done that kind of thing, like giving that kind of experience? I know Amazon has Rufus, but I
Yep.
don't know whether anybody has. Even that, it is more like an AI chat, but not on the search bar, is what I think.
Yeah, I think Walmart. Yeah, it's really the big ones who have done the most. So, in our grocery one, and again, that I think grocery is a bit actually is oddly one of the ones that's I think investing more heavily than some in this space. But Amazon, Walmart, Albertsons are a few that we looked in our study. We felt were doing pretty actively adding interesting experiences onto their own website. I think you're right. The one place we didn't see it is no one out of our study of like 25 leading grocers that included Amazon, that included Target, that included Walmart. No one had integrated AI into the search bar. So everything was sort of its own side experience. So you'd find the AI agent one way or another, and then you could have that interactive experience. What we've not seen yet is anyone doing if you go to Google right now, that's the first thing you can get is a whole AI answer. We've yet to
Mhm.
see the retailers do that. I assume it'll be where they'll go, but right now it's not been done yet. Which I think just shows the retailers are sort of taking baby steps. They're tentatively trying to figure out, what works, what doesn't work before they redesign the whole experience around these AI assistants.
I understand. Do you think that kind of personalization is will be very prominent in the next 5 years? Like providing that kind of understanding the customers overall background of why they are making a purchase. Is that going to be play a big role in next 5 years, in your opinion?
Yeah, I hope so. I mean, I think one of the nice things about AI is, if you think about the data we capture as a retailer, right? We get what did you buy? If you're buying online, we get all sorts of clickstream data. We don't
Mm.
really have a good way, we haven't had a good way, at least until recently, of getting at your intent. Like, what's really motivating you to buy that product? Maybe the idea, and I got this example from a newsletter I follow, but, let's say you're trying to figure out, like, my dog doesn't seem, is getting older. I'm trying to figure out should I buy a new dog food for them? And you go through a whole set of questions around, what's motivating that. My dog's getting older. Maybe they put on weight. I'm looking for something that's organic, or maybe it's grain free. If I can take all that now insight that I get that I might not have gotten before because all I knew what is really what you bought, I can now really personalize either an offer or an experience in a way I really couldn't before. It's going to put the onus on the retailers and the brands to take advantage of that data, because like anything in personalization, once consumers start getting used to a better experience, they're not going to respond well to something that sort of feels like last year or 5 years ago experience. So I think the onus will be on the retailers to stay ahead of the curve, or at least even with the curve here. But I think all that new insight really opens up opportunities to create a lot more relevant offers, a lot more relevant messaging, a lot more relevant, just content of what you see, that I think retailers can and will take advantage of.
If that is the situation, if something is going to happen, why would they need to come to your website? Like they can have that conversation from their WhatsApp or from whatever AI assistant they can have. It's more like a conversational commerce. They
It is.
can just play it, right? What is the need for a website in future then?
You mean just a website generally? Yeah, it's a good
Yeah,
question. I don't know. I mean, it's certainly possible that people adopt new ways of doing it. I mean, obviously, before the internet, we didn't use, we didn't have our computers, and then mobile came and we kind of switched to mobile. So I think it's a little hard to know what form factors people will use. And I do agree that there's going to be a much broader range of ways people
yeah.
engage, whether it's through chat or, texting. My TV set, connected
Yeah,
TV is
people can
clearly
text it and
growing.
say, I'm looking for something, I have this problem. Instead of coming to your site, going through category pages,
Yeah.
catalogs, finding the product, if that product system can find it or answer it for me, and that is the best price, and ask, what is the discount, what is my loyalty point. It applies instantly, and I do the checkout there itself. Why do I need to come to the website?
Yeah, I think. I do think it's an interesting question, particularly if I go, why go to the retailer's website?
Hmm.
I do think there's a bit of trust factor in it. I think people
Hmm.
do, and this is from research I've seen, people do still today at least trust the retailer more than they trust some of the, the third party LLMs or some of these other things. And so I do think there's something there the retailer can capitalize on. And if I have all this long history of my relationship with you as a customer, I should be able to be more personalized to you than just some random LLM is. That said, the only other thing I'd say about generally about how people shop is humans are kind of creatures of habit. And I think I've found in my career, we always tend to underestimate how long it takes people to change the way they do what they do. Right. And so, I think we've had grocery e-commerce in some form for like 20 years. It's still just kind of creeping up to 20% of total sales, right? I just think people get very used to how they do things. And so while in the technology industry, and I live in Silicon Valley, we
Hmm.
tend to assume everyone's going to adopt everything right away. The truth of the matter, it can take years before people feel comfortable doing
Yeah,
something new. They might try it once, but it might be 5 or 10 years before they completely change how they do things.
I understand. Again, when you talk about e-commerce, the systems are tracking it, but there are a lot many things happen in the store. A lot many conversations happens in the store. I don't know. Is there any systems being built to capture that with AI, or I don't
Yes.
know. Is there anything? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at it in two angles, I think that really the biggest impact that AI in the store I'm seeing is around computer vision and particularly around the ability to get information at the shelf. So, one of the things that's always been a bit hard for people outside of retail to understand is, for the most part, retailers have a really bad idea what's on the shelf at any given time, right? They know what products get sent to the store and they know what gets sold, but they don't really know is that shelf, let's say Cheerios, is the shelf empty or is it full? If it's empty, do I have stock in the back room or maybe it's on a secondary display? And I think the ability we're seeing now with computer vision to be able to really give you a, if not real time, near real time understanding of what's on the shelf allows you to much more rapidly refill the, restock if I have the inventory, reorder if I'm out. And that's important for a few reasons. One, what we found over time is out of stocks become a real loyalty issue. If I go to the store and an item's not there that I want to buy, it really reduces the chance I'm going to come back at a future time. And then with e-commerce growing, it's really frustrating if I think I'm buying a certain product and then it turns out I get a call, sorry, that's not available. Do you want to substitute? And so I think really knowing, yes, that's in stock or no, that's out of stock before somebody orders increasingly is important. I would say you're also seeing a lot of interesting things like I can get a much better view or an understanding of how people shop. So there's a company I was just chatting with yesterday called Shopnosis, and they give people Google glasses and they track how they shop. And now I start understanding, are people really seeing your signage when they buy the item, or they just go there? If I pick an item off the shelf, am I putting in my basket, or how often do I just put it back? It starts giving really new insight into how people shop that, frankly, we just haven't had before.
Yeah. So, is there any KPIs do you think retailers should use for store associate when they're using or investing on these AI technologies? Is that more out of stock orders, or what could be the KPIs?
Yeah. Look, I mean, KPIs can be hard in a retail setting. I mean, I do think I would certainly be tracking out of stock, I think is a good one, right? If you can reduce the out of stocks from, I don't know, 10 or 12% to 5, I mean, I think that makes a huge difference. I mean, I think that's industry wide, that's hundreds of millions of dollars of increased
Hmm.
sales. So, I mean, it's a huge number. Ultimately, I always look at the store in a little more simple metrics. I mean, I'm looking at, is sales per same store sales going up? Are we seeing increased traffic in the store? I think those are the things that I look at, that it's hard to measure every incremental thing that happens. So if you step back and just see if I'm doing a good job serving my customers and if AI is helping me do it, I should see them coming more frequently and buying more when they come to my store because I'm giving them a better experience. And if I'm not seeing that, especially if I'm spending a lot on new AI tools, then then I'm just not working out for me. But I think some of those simple metrics remain the ones that are important. I do think on the associate side, I think if you can reduce associate turnover, I think there's a lot of things operationally. I think you could start seeing in my my display, my planogram compliance better. All those sort of micro things I think are important, but yeah, I think everything ultimately comes back down. Customers coming more and buying more is the
Mhm.
ultimate measure of success for anything you do in retail.
Understand. And do you think in the past, like the retailers used to do segmentation of customers by some kind of filters who have bought this time or something like that? They do. Do you think AI will be replacing that? Understand the behavior of user? Do you think their retail store behavior, the e-commerce store behavior? So, do you think AI will replace that kind of traditional segmentation?
Um, I don't think so. I think segmentation still is important to understand your customers. I
Mhm.
mean, if you're thinking of like a strategy around merchandising, I can't have a merchandising strategy for each and every customer. I do want to think in segments. I do think one thing that the AI brings to the table is the ability to be a richer segmentation. If you've ever done a segmentation, it can be a somewhat. There's definitely a lot of art to it, and sometimes the data you get in it can be fairly fragmented. So I think if AI's ability to pull in more customer insight, integrate more data sets, have an understanding of a better view of the customer, I think all that can really help inform the segmentation. But I think you're still going to want it. Not everything is one to one. If I think about a broad, let's say I'm a CPG company, right, and I want to run a broad campaign around a new product I'm launching. You can't have every single thing be one to one. You want some broad themes, and so segmentation I think really helps there. Hopefully, you can get there faster and a little more richer in the segmentations with AI, but I don't think that really goes away as an important part of your business.
And the other important aspect always people have is the customer acquisition. So, what do you think in next 5 years? What kind of ways people should work to improve their customer acquisition? Because everywhere the prices are increasing, ad costs are increasing, and how AI can help on that on the
Yeah,
customer.
so I take that in two ways. I think on the acquisition front, I do think it's a challenging time just given the cost of some of the ads. I do think, oddly, I would take a pretty broad view of where to go. I mean, I think TV and radio, direct mail, there's a lot of sort of traditional media in some ways have been undervalued because of digital and the ability to target. Targeting is great. I've done it my whole career. But
Mhm.
it's surprising sometimes TV ads work really well. I was just at a conference talking about AI, and one of the retailers was talking about how they increased their TV buy, and it drove a significant amount of incremental sales. And so I think sometimes with digital has become so prominent, we tend to discount some of these mass tactics, or maybe even just more traditional ones. Like I said, direct mail I still find oddly can be effective as a tool. So I guess I would say like finding a range of ways. I do think you need to be thinking about agentic commerce and how to be visible on the AI engines. I think that's going to be a critical new thing to do. Some of that I don't know, there'll be like an SEO, SEM kind of dynamic with the engines, but making sure you're building out your product detail. Are you in some way answering questions that people are asking in their prompts? I think if you're not visible on those engines, it's going to be a real drag on sales. The flip of it being, if you do master that, you could jump ahead of competitors who don't get recommended because the engines don't even see them. The other angle I'll mention though is I, I've always believed, particularly for big businesses like, if I think about Kroger, retention is really more important than acquisition. It's not that acquisition isn't important. You always want to bring in new customers, but it was something like we had to acquire 9 new customers for every loyal customer who we lost. And so I do think using AI to think about how am I serving my customers? Am I missing anything in the way that I'm working with them? Can AI help me get a better understanding of their needs so I can serve them better? Can I assort better? Can I promote and price better? Given all that data, to me, that's really where the win is doing better with your existing customers, breaking, how do I get more of their share of wallet? I think that's where I'd really be spending a lot of time trying to figure out how do I get better at that.
Interesting. Again, let's first take this first part you talked about AI visibility. Many retailers think it is more like SEO, another new form of SEO. Do you think that is the same approach people should do, or is it going to be completely different?
Yeah, I think it feels to me it's a lot different, right? Because I think it feels like SEO is something people could get their hands around, right? There was an algorithm, you could test a lot of things. Some of that probably doesn't go away. I think the big thing that's interesting on uh, GEO, I guess what they sometimes call it, right, is the need for better product data and not just depth of data, but are you answering questions people are likely to have? So, for example, if you are selling bathing suits, right, some insight about, people might want to know, is there a key pocket on the inside of the swimsuit? Does it going to lose its color if I'm wearing it in salt water? How quickly does it dry? There's a lot of details that, frankly, if you go look at any PDP or product description on a retailer site, that just don't get answered, right? They'll tell you the fabric and they'll highlight the benefits. It's a lot of nitty gritty things that I think are important to people that don't really get addressed. And so I think you need to spend time understanding that. And that might be one of the keys to GEOs, understanding what are the questions people are asking and make sure you're providing answers, whether that's on your own site or on various sites that might be feeding the LLMs. I think that's increasingly important because the challenge, of course, is that everyone's experience with the LLMs a bit different, right? Because your history with it, the questions you've been asking, the things you want to do are different. So it's a lot harder to coordinate when the LLMs are effectively very much tailoring their answers to each person. So I think you have to focus on the basics. Do I have rich product data? Am I working to answer the questions that I think people are asking? And I think those are going to be some of the keys to success. Maybe marketing on it. I think advertising is fairly new, but that could also be something I would be testing.
I don't see any marketing. Is it possible to advertise in these tools? I don't think so
That's
right
a
now.
so
They might
yes-ish.
also.
What we're finding is so ChatGPT has been the one that you see the most. I guess experiments maybe with advertising. I think we're seeing them be pretty proactive with trying to test different advertising. Amazon is doing it. When we did our study, Amazon was the only one of the major retailers that we saw actively advertising on their answer engine, so their AI assistant. Um, Kroger, Walmart, Target, a bunch of the others say they're experimenting with it, but I think they're doing it in small tests. So I think we're going to see it. It's hard to imagine that the big LLMs and the retailers aren't going to see the answers and the responses they're giving as a chance to earn ad revenue. And so I think we'll begin to see it. I still think it's very early days, and I think people are probably reasonably worried. We don't want to undermine the relevance or the experience people have. I think people feel like when I'm engaging with ChatGPT, they're my advocate, right? They're working on my behalf. And so I think you have to be a bit careful how ads get built in there, because if I think you're only recommending a product because somebody paid you to recommend it, it really starts undermining that trust I might have in the LLM to give me fair answers.
Mhm. One of the areas, again, people generally can have is that this hallucinations, specifically if AI is not understanding your product and saying it in a right, not a right way. So, how do you think people like they might get this information wrong, right? In
Mhm.
many ways. So, is there any way that companies has to be aware of all these things? Hey, you are not being correctly mentioned or not picked
Yeah,
up. So,
I mean, we're already seeing a lot. I'm already seeing, chatting with a bunch of folks. I'm already seeing a lot of tools that are developing that, help people go and figure out how are you showing up in the LLMs, right? And
Mhm.
are you are you showing up at all if there's a search? To your point, are you being positioned the right way? If somebody asks a question, let's say somebody's asking, does this going to shrink? And your thing doesn't shrink, but it says, don't buy this one because it shrinks. I think you have to be very proactive in it. It's a little harder because it's not just a matter of fixing like an error on your own site. It's if Reddit is feeding ChatGPT and there's like threads on Reddit that misrepresent your product, right? You have to figure out how am I going to be proactive on Reddit and getting that message changed around, right? You can't just sit back and hope for the best, right? You have to be more proactive about the areas where are feeding these LLMs if you want to be positioned in the right way. Particularly if for whatever reason, your
Mhm.
your thing doesn't shrink, but there are folks online talking about, saying, well, that shrinks because the LLM will just assume that's what it does, right? If you don't get proactive about it.
Okay. The reason why I asked is like one of our sister organization called Conversion Box. We work on AI visibility, and we have tools to improve conversion visibility. But sometimes we face this kind of issues like the hallucination is making the brand in a negative way.
Yeah.
So it is a time consuming process, and sometimes it is manual. So just want to understand that.
Yeah, no, I think it's hard work. I don't think there's going to be an easy. I think in some ways we're going to look back on the easy days of SEO, SCM, and think, wow,
Yeah.
that was very manageable. I think it'll be hard. I don't know what choice you have though, Reese, as you mentioned, as consumers adopt these tools and they use them more frequently, you don't
Mhm.
have a lot of choice but to fight the fight to make sure you're represented the right way.
Mhm.
I think also people tend to underestimate how much the engines can hallucinate, right? So it's people are just going to accept it if ChatGPT tells me your product isn't any good, I'll just assume that's the case, right?
Yes.
I'm probably not going to go do extra work to figure out if that's really accurate. So kind
That's
of the
what
onus
people
is
want.
on the brand.
It should not hallucinate, even if it's not picking up. First, it should not write anything negative about us. That's what people are afraid of right
Yeah.
now. So I want you think a retailer should thinking about AI adoption. So, what should their first step like? It should be like they should connect with companies like you, or should do an internal team, do some kind of strategy things. How should they start the adoption?
Yeah. I think there's no one right way. I do think that generally speaking, I'd say starting with the strategy, and where do we want to go? Because, like I said, I think a lot of organizations right now are very bottoms up, right? It's like marketing did something here, and IT is maybe doing some coding tools, and maybe merchandising is doing something over there. And I think it's important to start at the top with a real strategy for the company, right? What are we trying to get out of AI? Where are we going to focus? What guardrails are we going to put in place? What kind of budget are we going to allocate to? I think those are all important things to get first. I do think there's value in, I think we find having a third party who's kind of like us, who have experience in the space, experience in retail, is helpful because I think a lot of the organizations, AI is, like one more new technology that is hard. It's a challenge to bring on any new technology, but particularly one like AI, where it feels like every day or every week something new's come out, right? There's a new model, there's a way of doing something. Some big competitor like Walmart's announced something new, and I think it's hard for most retailers to just keep their hands around it. So I think having a partner, on that journey really helps. But starting with the strategy, what are the use cases that have the most value for us, and really focusing on them. And then, like I said, building out like a change management approach. I think those are some of the real building blocks, really any retailer needs.
I understand. And talking about guardrails, how do you think like a retailer should adopt? Is there any best approach, or because it can have a negative impact in many ways across the organization? How do you think companies should adapt that?
Yeah, to me, one of the big, I mean, there's a lot of, things that would flow into that. I think on
Mhm.
really understanding where you're going to let the AI do work and where you're going to have a human checking it, right? And so I do think it's less of an issue early when, let's say, you're just using AI to review data. But even there, right, you have to understand like what process do I use to make sure that data is accurate? What process, frankly, do I have to make sure, I'm sharing things I should share with the AI? Am I maintaining control of confidentiality, between groups, between the company and the outside world. Um, and so I think a lot of it, though, for me, the biggest ones are around like, how are we going to make sure that we're making right decisions, right? We're not just defaulting to the AI, you know, in a way that we're going to regret later because it hallucinated or it led to us a bad decision down the road. I think that's particularly true when you start automating things with agents, is understanding what are we going to allow to be automated, but what kind of checks do we put in um,
Hmm.
to make sure that things are moving in the direction we actually want it to move.
I understand. And do you think I see a lot of another thing is people are having an chief AI officer within the organization. Is that something is that would be the norm in coming days across all the organization, or that is one of few companies doing it?
No, I see it a lot. I think we're increasingly seeing it. I mean, I do think for a general matter, when we work with companies, it is helpful to have one executive be on point for AI, right? Because I think somebody has to be working across the organization and the different functions to really come up with a strategy and then push to get change to happen. And it's usually easier to have one senior executive on point. Do they have to be chief AI officer? Probably not. Really, it could be part of their portfolio without the title. I am seeing many companies are doing it. Some of that's probably signaling that we're serious about AI, right? It's, hey, we have a chief AI officer, we're doing AI. So I don't know the title is as important as having somebody who's on the hook to make sure we're pushing ahead and we're doing it in the way we've all agreed is the right way for our company. I think the title is a little bit of it's sort of like all of a sudden, whatever it was 10, 15 years ago, all of a sudden you had chief digital officers.
Yeah,
And I still think we're probably at some level still trying to figure out what is a chief digital officer, what's a chief, you know, customer
CIO.
officer. What do they actually do?
Yeah. Okay, I understand. And how do you think companies should bring the AI culture or AI powered culture kind of, rather than one team does one project, other team does project? How to bring that kind of culture within the team?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of areas I'll look at. So and some of these are really informed by what we went through when I was at Kroger around taking on customer data, but I think some of the principles are the same. I think one, it has to be led from the top. I do think it's important, right? I think, we should, companies should be seeing the CEO and the COO embrace AI, use AI in
Hmm.
meetings, talk about how it's being leveraged because, people do look at the senior people. And if they're not engaged, if they're not using, in the case of Kroger, when I was there, customer data, to make their decisions, then the rest of the organization is going to follow. Um,
Yeah.
I think you have to rethink your processes. I think you have to be open to say, is there a better way of doing things? I think if you just automate your current process, you probably get value out of it because there is a lot of manual work in these retail processes. But really rethinking, particularly across your functions and silos, I think is where the real value is. And so I think, creating a culture where we're going to not just accept that the way we do business for the last 50 years is the way we should do it for the next 50, I think it is important. And then, like I said, just getting coordination across groups. So setting up the right structures that you're not just looking at one function, but you're really bringing together the best thinking across the organization and then training the organization in a way that they really understand how to use it, how to get value out of it. Because what I usually find a lot of retailers do, and maybe it's all companies, but I've seen it in retail, they just dump something new on everyone's desk. And what happens is people just see it as being one more thing I've got to master and spend time on, not something that really saves me time or makes my job easier. And I think the companies that really are going to succeed are the ones that can show their employees, not just at headquarters in the store, that this is actually going to make your life easier. It's going to take off some of the work that you hate doing and let you focus on the work that you can add real value. And so I think the companies that can make that mindset shift and really show that value are the ones that are really going to win.
Uh, so one last question is, what would be your advice to someone who's listening to this podcast, who's a CEO of a retailer or a manufacturer? What would be the advice uh, on this AI journey? What would be your advice for them?
Well, you should give me a call. I would say first. But no, look, I think what I'd say is everyone has good intentions, right? I've yet to talk to a CEO who's not really thinking about AI and how to use it. But I think the key is to start with what are you trying to get out of AI? And I think in a retail setting, a lot of that comes down to, comes all the way back to the customer, which is a little bit where we started. But it's, ultimately, how do I deliver a better experience to my customer, and how do I make my jobs easier of my associates so they can deliver a better experience to the customers? Ultimately, in retail, that's what it comes down to, right? The customer is going to buy an item from me. I want to build that relationship with them. So how does AI make that experience I deliver better? How does AI make it easier for the people in my organization to do the things they need to do to make that experience better and win that business from that customer? And that, I think, if you take that mindset, it can bring a lot of clarity and focus to what you're doing, because that's where really the win is going to be. And I think it makes it a little easier for retail leadership to have some clarity and some focus for where they want to go on that journey, where are they going to start, and where do they hope to get to.
Do you think AI will replace jobs?
Um, that is a tough question. So I think that probably the answer is yes and no. If that's not wishy-washy enough for you, I think on the one hand is it's clearly going to change jobs, right? If I've got a bunch of analysts in my organization now whose whole job it is to pull the sales data and put it into a nice report for leadership every Monday, if that's their main job, I don't know that job stays around. Does that mean, though, then you'll hire new people or retrain those people to do more advanced analytics, right? To look for those new insights? That might be the way it worked. I think in the store, the one that a lot of retailers I talk to sort of see as a chance of taking labor out. And I would argue that's a big mistake. And I sometimes lose this argument, but I think the idea is that I think actually the store experience becomes more important in an AI world, because that is a place where AI doesn't necessarily have an impact, right? I think when people come into a store, if you could offer them a really great experience in that physical setting, I think you're going to win more business. And I still think that's an area where you're going to have less disruption than you will, let's say, on online sales with agentic commerce. And so, my argument would be you might change some of the jobs. Maybe you need fewer cashiers, you need fewer people who are checking whether items are out of stock. I would repurpose those, though, for, how do I give a better customer experience? Different, maybe it's different help, different assistance along the way, but that's how I'd look at it. I do think, like a lot of businesses, retailers look for a chance to right size or streamline the organization. But I would do that carefully. I always see AI as being more of a chance to enhance rather than just automate people out. But like I said, I think different retailers will take a different approach to that.
I understand. All right. Thanks, Ken. I believe we are close to the podcast. So thanks for your time, and I hope we'll connect with you for another interesting topic.
Well, thanks very much. Appreciate you having me. It's a great conversation.
Thanks, Ken. Have a great day.